And if you want to go super cheap, you're going to have to homebrew, because making a vial of testosterone enanthate or boldenone and destinate is significantly cheaper when you do it yourself. Vigorous Steve here. So it looks like there's a recession coming, and that means that some of us, if not all of us, might have to cut down on our bodybuilding expenses. Again, bodybuilding is a huge luxury that can get very expensive very quick, but we still all want to continue with our bodybuilding journey or our fitness aspirations. But I think it's best that some of us, if not all of us, reduce our bodybuilding expenses for the sole reason to keep some money parked to the side, have some savings, some cash available for when the day comes that the cryptocurrency market or the stock market or whatever other asset that you're interested in is there for a bargain. Right now it's already at a bargain, but I think we can get a better deal in the next couple of months. So you might want to save some money, put that money on the side for when the day comes that the stock market or the cryptocurrency market is really in a slump, allowing you to get your buy order in, setting yourself up for financial freedom a couple months, maybe years down the line, when the recession is over, the market recovers, and then grows from there. So you can save some money on your luxury expenses for financial freedom later on. And since there's a ton of inflation, rate hikes, the cost of goods are going up, I figured now would be the perfect time to give you guys some insight on how to do bodybuilding as cheaply as possible so you can save yourself some money and survive this period that is probably upcoming. Let's start with the cycle, but before we do, please like the video or leave a comment for the algorithm and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell button while you're at it so you can get notified whenever a new video drops. So for the sake of the audience retention and the mighty YouTube algorithm, let's start with the cycle first. But if you're currently drug-free and not taking any performance-enhancing drugs, feel free to use the timestamps to skip ahead to the training, the supplementation, or the nutrition parts of this video, because that encompasses budget bodybuilding as well. Regarding the cycle, there's maybe 3 compounds that I would recommend you guys from the anabolic androgenic steroid perspective. That being testosterone, boldenone, and perhaps Anadrol. Now, if you combine testosterone with boldenone, and again, kidney toxicity issues aside, again, we're trying to keep the cycle as cheap as possible, so that means that primobolan is kind of out of the picture. You might be able to get away with a low-dose nandrolone or low-dose trenbolone, a low dose that would yield results, but doesn't give you side effects that would require you to take ancillaries like cabergoline or an aromatase inhibitor or Nolvadex to prevent gynecomastia, right? We have to make this as simple and as cheap as possible. I think that testosterone enanthate and boldenone and destinate give you the most bang for your buck when you're comparing all of the injectable steroids that are readily available on the market. I already made 2 separate videos about this topic, one comparing the amount of milligrams that you get from a single 1 milliliter injection, comparing the active pharmaceutical ingredient of all of these steroids, which are contained in underground and pharmaceutical products. So that means that testosterone enanthate and boldenone and destinate are top of the list because they're high concentration, and even though the ester weight comprises a large percentage of the amount of milligrams that you're injecting, because the concentration is so high, from a single injection you might still get 150, 180, or maybe even 200 milligrams for a single shot. I made a separate video comparing all of the prices for the active pharmaceutical ingredient, so you know exactly how many US dollars or how many cents of a US dollar you're spending on a single milligram of the active pharmaceutical ingredient. So please give those videos a watch when you're done with this one so you know which injectable steroids are the cheapest to use. And if you want to go super cheap, you're going to have to homebrew, because making a vial of testosterone enanthate or boldenone and destinate is significantly cheaper when you do it yourself. Now, personally, I don't have so much experience with homebrewing, so I would always defer to Chase Irons. I'll link his YouTube channel down below. That's the main source if you want to learn about homebrewing. And instead of spending $50 on a vial of test enanthate, you might end up spending $10 or only $15 if you do it yourself. But then again, the initial investment to homebrew might be quite costly, especially comparing that to buying a couple vials of test enanthate or boldenone and destinate online through a source that is not charging an arm and a leg for high quality product. Keep that in mind. Homebrewing might still be the cheapest option if you're looking at it from a long-term perspective. Test NEQ 1-to-1 ratio. This way, most people don't need an aromatase inhibitor. because boldenone and some of its metabolites, that being dihydroboldenone or arimistane, ATD, and a couple other metabolites which I can't possibly pronounce the name of, so they'll be on the screen right now. All of these reversely bind to the aromatase enzyme, preventing the conversion of testosterone into estradiol. And I feel that most people can start off in a 1-to-1 ratio because, again, since enanthate and andestinate are quite close in its molecular composition when you compare the ester to the active pharmaceutical ingredient between testosterone and boldenone, a 1-to-1 ratio is a good starting point. So let's say 250 milligrams test E and 250 milligrams EQ per week. That's a total of 500 milligrams per week. This should be able to sustain your size, allow you to make improvements during the off-season, assuming that your caloric intake is sufficient, which, don't worry, we'll discuss a little bit later in this video, how to make a cheap diet for yourself. In my opinion, I feel that a 1-to-1 ratio doesn't require you to use an aromatase inhibitor, which would otherwise further add to the cost of your cycle. Now, you would still need to do blood work, so you would need to check your lipid levels and your serum estradiol levels just to make sure that everything is going according to plan. And if your estradiol is too high, you might want to reduce your testosterone and increase your boldenone, and vice versa if your estradiol is too low. Keep that in mind. It's probably the cheapest cycle you can run, and whether you do 250 milligrams a test and 250 milligrams of EQ or a higher dose, or 375, 500, 750 each, that's entirely up to you, and it highly depends on how much money you want to spend on your cycle. And then maybe if you want to increase lagging body parts during this recession, 50 milligrams Anadrol once or twice per week should not potentiate too many side effects to the point you need all kinds of ancillaries to control them, not potentiate any gynecomastia, because you're using testosterone and boldenone in a 1-to-1 ratio, which should control your estradiol levels. You're not adding in a progestogenic 19-nor like nandrolone or trenbolone on top, even though I know some of you guys will add 50 milligrams trenbolone acetate per week just to get a little bit more anabolism out of it during this recession period. Feel free to go ahead if you can deal with the mental side effects that come with a combination of boldenone and trenbolone. Again, it's entirely up to you how much money you want to spend and how you can tolerate the side effects of trenbolone and boldenone in combination. I would personally do maybe 50 milligrams Anadrol sublingually. Again, I only want the anabolism and none of the androgenicity that comes from its metabolite, mestanolone. 50 milligrams Anadrol sublingually before a separate quad-specific leg day and a separate hamstring-specific leg day. And if you want to take Anadrol sublingually before your chest day or your shoulder day or your back day, again, it's entirely up to you. For my personal experience and many of my clients, once or twice per week doesn't potentiate any real side effects. Now, on the day that you take it, obviously, you might get slight blood pressure increases. So there are some ancillaries in place to keep your heart rate and blood pressure in check. And if you want to get both at the same time, I would say that Nebivolol is the ancillary of choice. It is a beta blocker that also improves your blood pressure. Now, will you get the same amount of blood pressure management like lisinopril or telmisartan or Cialis, or managing your electrolyte intake, which should be a freebie during a recession? That's very easy to manage, very cost effective to manage your blood pressure with accurate and calculated electrolyte intake that's consistent throughout the week. Probably not to that extent. And from my personal experience and many of yours, Nebivolol doesn't in any way, shape, or form reduce exercise performance. If anything, it improves exercise performance by shortening the duration between working sets, because your heart rate comes down faster, and this allows for more hypertrophy signaling, allowing you also to get the workout done in a shorter period of time, allowing you to focus more on work. Again, how many minutes of workout are you going to shave off? Maybe 5 minutes. But hey, over the course of a year or two, every 5 minutes counts. Nebivolol also allows you to eat less during the off season because, again, your metabolic rate is slowed down because your resting heart rate is reduced by the use of a beta blocker. Your blood pressure is controlled slightly by the use of Nebivolol. And in this sense, Nebivolol should also be able to mitigate some of the negative heart remodeling, which comes along with an elevated hematocrit level, having thicker, quote unquote, thicker blood, and using anabolic androgenic steroids at the same time for longer periods of time. Nebivolol is probably your one-stop shop for an ancillary. I don't think that during this recession period, when you're trying to save as much money as possible, that ezetimibe is required because, again, you can control your cholesterol levels with dietary changes or doing daily fasted cardio or using some of the supplements, which I do feel are essential even when you're trying to save as much money as possible. I don't think that telmisartan is required. Again, if you're focusing on your electrolyte intake and you're already taking Nebivolol to control your blood pressure, and that's assuming that you're not taking Anadrol every single day of the week for months in duration, I feel that these compounds are more than enough to sustain your bodybuilding journey during a recession, allowing you to save money while still focusing on your goals and making good improvements, albeit that you might look a little bit fluff. You won't look your best shape ever, but you're trying to save money, so don't expect the world out of it. I think all you need is testosterone enanthate, boldenone and destinate, Anadrol occasionally, and then Nebivolol as your sole ancillary. Now, I know some of you guys have a little bit more money to spend, so let me open up Pandora's box. Growth hormone, I think, is way too expensive during a recession. You're spending too much money on every single unit of growth hormone. And even if you go with Chinese generics, the water retention and the potential side effects that you get from that might force you to take ancillaries or megadose your taurine or use mastrone to get the water off, right? We're trying to do this as cheap and easy as possible. The only real option you have to increase your growth hormone levels is fasting. Well, that doesn't make you give gain. So the second option would be to use a low dose of MK677 before bed. And I'm talking about 10 milligrams, 20 milligrams. Most people from 30 milligrams upwards during the off season where they're eating a ton of food, and especially during this time when you're eating mostly carbohydrates because they're cheap. I would prefer not to go into the higher dosages of MK677 because you do want to keep your insulin sensitivity intact while you're eating a ton of carbs. So maybe 10 milligrams before bed, up to 20 milligrams before bed for a longer period of time should be sufficient to raise your growth hormone and IGF-1 levels somewhat to improve your recovery during this recession, but not enough to the point you need to take drastic measures and follow a mini diet or take a boatload of metformin or try to control your blood glucose levels with all kinds of insulins, which I also think is beneficial during this period. But a low dose of MK677 and a low dose of long-acting insulin, which doesn't require you to continuously check your glucose levels, I think that combination, if you have the money to spend for it, I think that's more than enough on top of the test, boldenone, Anadrol, and Nebivolol. So that's 10 to 20 milligrams MK677 before bed. Maybe you take that 5 days on, 2 days off. 2 days off when you're increasing your carbohydrate intake during the weekend because you're eating a little bit more freely and you want to have some fun by going out and eating whatever, right? We still have a social aspect to maintain because, well, otherwise we're just stuck at home all day doing nothing but playing video games and making YouTube videos. At 10 to 20 milligrams per day, I don't think you'll lose a lot of insulin sensitivity unless you're eating a ton of saturated fats and a lot of simple sugars, which you should be avoiding because it's just not healthy. You might be able to get away with a low-dose long-acting insulin in the form of Lantus. I'm talking about 1 IU per 10 kilos of body weight or 22 pounds of body weight. So for me, being around 100 kilos, that's 10 IUs of Lantus upon waking. And whether I'm during the off-season or a cutting phase, 10 IUs of Lantus, 1 IU per 10 kilos of body weight, doesn't require me to carefully monitor my blood glucose levels because my blood glucose levels upon waking, in between meals, post-workout, inter-workout, before bed, are all very comparable regardless of my caloric intake. All I'm getting is more favorable nutrient partitioning and nutrient absorbing. I mean, I've even done 5 to 10 units of Lantus while I was fasting, and still my serum glucose levels would not be unfavorable, would still remain above 70 milligrams per deciliter at any point during the day, most times 80, 85 milligrams per deciliter. So again, I feel this is a reasonably innocuous dose, but the nutrient partitioning is quite noticeable. And again, Lantus is very, very cheap. So if you're on a budget and you want to get more nutrient partitioning and nutrient absorption out of your cheap off-season foods, and you want to get more out of your anabolic androgenic steroids, I feel that the low dose of long-acting insulin upon waking is highly beneficial because you do notice such a profound beneficial effect by adding the long-acting insulin in upon waking. If you have a glucometer, feel free to bump up the dose. Now you can check your glucose levels upon waking, before meals, post-workout, before bed. And if all are within normal parameters, they're all in range and you know how to adjust your diet to keep all of your glucose readings throughout the day within favorable ranges, feel free to bump up the dose. I feel that insulin is highly beneficial if you're able to control your blood glucose levels and you're really on top of your nutritional intake. And for what you get out of insulin, the amount of anabolism and recovery that you get, it's a really cheap compound to use. But then again, it does require some discretion. It does require you to do additional research and really make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into. And that's why I made that insulin ebook, so you know how to use insulin responsibly and safely. Direct link down below. So for the people who have a little bit more disposable income during this recession, MK677 and perhaps a low dose of long-acting insulin Lantus upon waking. And I think this cycle is pretty much complete that way. You should be able to gain size on this cycle. You should be able to gain strength. You should be able to make progress. Will you look shredded? Probably not. Will you look super, super round and hard and nasty dense? Of course not. But let's be freaking honest. To look exceptionally good, you're spending a lot more money because the pharmacology that's involved is more expensive. The foods that you're generally eating are more expensive because they need to be cleaner and supposedly drier, like less fat intake. And the carbohydrate selection is going to be a little bit more expensive because, well, now your caloric intake is severely restricted. And that means that for a reduced amount of calories, you need to get more micronutrients. And for that, you need more micronutrient-dense foods, which are generally speaking more expensive. But when your caloric intake is very high during the off-season, you're automatically getting a ton of micronutrients in. So even if you eat rice and chicken and cheap ground beef and maybe some whole eggs, you already get a ton of micronutrients that way because your caloric intake is so high. But I think this video has already been going on way too long, so let's save that for the next video. In the next video, we'll discuss training, supplementation, and nutrition for budget bodybuilding. This was the cycle. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much for watching. You can find everything I'm associated with down below in the description section. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at VigorSteve. Have a look at some of my sponsors and affiliates so you can use my discount code while shopping online and save yourself 5%, 10%. Some affiliates even have 20% discount when you use my codes. Head over to VigorSteve.com. Look at some of the articles. They're all free. Ton of information that you can find there. Bookmark that site, VigorSteve.com, for your own reading pleasure on your leisure time. Vigorous crew, you guys know what to do. A front double bicep for you guys. Unfortunately, this front double bicep is not quite budget. I do spend quite a lot of money on my bodybuilding journey. Yeah, it is what it is. I love my bodybuilding and I would not like to let it go unless absolutely required. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.